Okay, so the next question, how can we support neurodiverse students even if they don't have a diagnosis or official accommodations? Can needs be met with Universal Design for Learning, UDL?
That is a great question. I'm just going to start out by defining Universal Design for Learning, or UDL, it's called for short. UDL is a framework to improve and optimize teaching and learning for all people based on scientific insights into how humans learn. The goal of UDL is learner agency that is purposeful and reflective, resourceful and authentic, strategic and action-oriented. UDL guidelines are organized into 3 principles: engagement, representation, and action and expression. When a variety of options are available to provide multiple means of approaching each principle, barriers are reduced and access to that principle is increased. This was found on cas.org. I highly recommend that website as a place to get information about UDL. And what this comes down to, and what I like in part about this definition, is that it doesn't say teaching and learning for people with learning differences or for neurodivergent individuals. It says for all people based on scientific insights into how humans learn. It also is clearly stating that if you provide a variety of options, if you make them available or accessible to your classroom as a whole, use multiple means of approach, so use multiple principles, use multiple approaches, then barriers are reduced. So learning barriers are reduced. And what this is saying is, you teach to the whole classroom in ways that will end up being inclusive of people with complex needs, which, let's be honest, as Julie talked about early on, a lot of people, we don't know necessarily if they're neurodivergent or not. There's a certain portion of the population that is neurodivergent and not aware of it, or has learning needs that, again, have not been diagnosed. And so the more that we can create classrooms, inclusive classrooms that reach those students, the better. So it's a holistic, whole classroom approach that's highly inclusive and diversifies instruction.
One of the things when we started talking about using UDL in New Mexico, I was really excited because this is how sometimes you come across something that you've done forever and now it's been given a name. That's what UDL is for me. I've been doing this my entire teaching career. And basically what this says to me is don't focus on the student deficits, focus on their strengths. And there are many, many ways you can do that. One of the examples that I saw from the article from the Cleveland Clinic is an example of dyslexia. So people that struggle with reading, it's because their brain doesn't process written language like the brain of someone without dyslexia. But there's many, many strengths. I've worked with many people who have dyslexia. This one person, her drawings came off the page. I know somebody who didn't quite fail miserably in math, but got D's, right, in high school. But then when he went on to in the workforce, he was building roller coasters, and he was the trig guy. I have a trig question. So he got the information. He just didn't get it the way it was presented. So we need to start presenting things in a different way for these people and not just verbally, because a lot of people don't learn that way. Some of the strategies I use for that is for dyslexia specifically. One of my first student teaching roles was in a school that the students going there had dyslexia or ADHD and ASD. So there were so many people with dyslexia. That was the reason why the school was founded. And I found it interesting. The teachers always read the information to the students. It just took away the, oh my gosh, the teacher's going to call on me kind of feeling. And it made people feel a lot more comfortable. So the checks for understanding in that classroom were more about the discussions around comprehension. Do I understand this information? And then they used programs like Kurzweil. There's a program called Bookshare where you can download information and it can be read to you. Books on tape, it's that kind of thing, but it's a whole program for that. So in my class, if I have a student with not only dyslexia, but if I have an ESL classroom with learners who are level 2, so they don't quite understand the reading in English, I have a dialogue up on the board. I'm going to read the entire dialogue. If someone can take a part and read the whole thing, they do that. If someone can only read one line of the dialogue, they do that. It's all, what can you do? I'm meeting my students where they are at the moment and focusing on their strengths. I'm telling you, that's the class where the student made the MSG gains in one semester by using those kind of strategies.
I really appreciate your direct classroom experience to bring to this. It's really great. And I also really appreciate Dené's policy background. It's so important to have these very different views here, these experiences and suggestions. So we're going to switch gears here.
So yeah, we are switching gears a little bit. We're going to be talking about some other, not just ideas, but theories that may be a little outdated. And so the next question really focuses on learning styles. My understanding is that the older idea of learning styles, kinesthetic, visual, auditory, etc., is now outdated. However, I have students who come in feeling very strongly that they are a quote unquote visual or something else learner. For some, I think it's part of their being neurodivergent, but I'm just guessing. Do you think I should let them know that the learning styles have been sort of debunked? It seems like some students really feel strongly that it's a part of their identity, so I don't want to invalidate that. I, of course, will still try to incorporate brain-based learning principles as much as I can.
I appreciate that. I just wanted to add before, I know I'm switching the format here. So learning styles itself, as in these styles work best for me, that has not been debunked. What has been debunked is the theory, the educational theory that teaching to individual learning styles is better for students. This has not been able to be replicated in multiple studies. So that's what we're talking about when we say debunked. That does not mean that someone is a more or less a visual learner. So I just want to talk about that. I just want to lay that out first, just to be clear, because we're trying to move away from this kind of language.
Thank you for clarifying that, Nadia. Yes, that's very important.
That's super interesting. Thank you, Nadia. For me, in this question, I think it's just really important to first of all, try not to minimize or devalue a student's beliefs. If this is how they are describing themselves or how they are describing a need, if this is the language that they have at this moment to express a learning need or a need in the classroom, it's not really like our place as instructors to be like, actually, this whole line of thinking has been debunked, and like, they're like, to make them in any way feel small, or silly. And you run the risk too of like it seeming like you're invalidating the need as an instructor. So I don't know that I would correct any sort of language or anything in that instance. I actually think it's important not to, but rather, as long as the student's point of view about their own learning is not detrimental in some way to themselves or to the class, it's best to simply accept and ask questions about it. Like, what does this mean for your learning? And then you adjust your approach to address the stated need. And again, in a whole classroom approach. So you'd want to ask your students what they need, both in a group context and individually. And then you want to incorporate methodology in the classroom that addresses those needs for the room holistically.
I also think that trauma comes into play here. If someone is specifically coming up to you and saying, I learned this way, they're trying to see if they can trust you because they haven't been able to trust people in the past. So if someone came up to me and said, my learning style is I'm visual or whatever, that's great because that's part of how I teach. One of the things that I really learned a lot from was the training from the back of the room, a training that Propel offers. Also, teaching skills that matter. TBR training was very big on 6 ways.
6 times, 6 ways.
And that's pretty much what's leading to all the different learning styles. If someone responds well to visual, I also want to introduce other modalities of learning because then they're going to get used to it. One of the things that I learned a long time ago This was one of the many times I've seen Dr. Temple Grandin speak. She is very big on when you're working with people, you try to push people a little bit past their comfort zone, but not to the point of anxiety. So teaching multiple modalities kind of helps that. They've gotten the information by learning visually, but then now they're kind of branching out a little bit. Okay, I have it visually. Now I'm going to hear it. Now I'm going to do something tactile to learn, and maybe they'll broaden their horizons that way. So that's a really neat way to think about it when you're planning lessons, to just push people a little bit. If you're starting to see anxiety, though, you need to pull back, and that didn't work. And that there's never a place for anxiety.
Thank you. So just to give just some definitions for listeners. So training from the back of the room is instructional methodologies that can be used with almost any content. And the idea behind it is that these are multiple tools that you could use to reinforce the content. So different ways. And exactly like Julie put it, some tools work better for people than others. And part of being a teacher, part of working with other people, is trying different things and seeing what works and what doesn't. TSTM, which has been rebranded, so Teaching Skills That Matter. So we've really worked with this, and we have an episode with the TSTM team and how they reworked Teaching Skills That Matter, the curriculum, the content specifically for adult learners, to better address the needs of New Mexico educators. So they called it TSTM Essentials now, which I would say check both out, because they both in very different ways give you new tools to work with your students. So specifically for, New Mexico practitioners. So I just wanted to add that, just to clarify. I've only read one of Temple Grandin's books, with Visual Thinkers, and that was really exciting. It was just an exciting book. There are some points where Temple gets a little cantankerous, like kids these days and whatever. And I'm like, yeah, I get it, Temple. You're like in your 70s. It's okay. I think
she might even be in her 80s now.
Yeah, she's probably in her 80s now. Yeah. I was like, real gumption kind of person. But what I took from that book more than anything is that, again, re-emphasizing like that multiple modality. So like different things work for different people, and you have to give your students that chance to respond to it. And you as an educator can only improve by adding more to your toolkit. So that's what's really important here.
And, I want to just really quickly add a couple of things. As far as TBR, the person who asked this question did say at the very end that they wanted to incorporate brain-based learning principles as much as they could, which is TBR. TBR incorporates those brain-based learning principles. So I wanted to add that. But the other thing that I wanted to just emphasize was, Julie, when you were talking about trust in the classroom and building that trust with the students, I think that that's really at the core of what this question is talking about. What we're really trying to emphasize is that when you get an adult education student, these students, whether they have any kind of learning disability difference, neurodiversity, any of that or not, chances are they're coming with some kind of a trust issue. And like you said, Julie, trauma. And so they are trying to find ways to build that trust. And this is one of those ways that you can do that. It's an opportunity for you as an instructor to build that trust by listening to the student. When they come to you and they say, I learned this way, they're giving you a little bit of information about themselves to figure out if they can give you more. And so when you accept that, when you build on that, when you work from that, you are showing them that you are worthy of that trust, and that the information and tools and support that you are going to give them is building on that and can be trusted as something that will help them. So I just wanted to mention that especially when I was teaching, I do not teach anymore, but when I was teaching, building trust in the classroom, building community in the classroom was a huge part of what I felt my job was. And so I think that that's very important.
I agree, Jamie. That's like my number one in the classroom.
So this next question, also switching gears, but I think is really, really important to understand. Should we teach about ADA compliance and what it means for those with diagnosed disabilities? For example, what are reasonable accommodations for someone with a disability? When is neurodiversity considered a disability?
That's a great question. I'm going to defer to Julie for some portions of this, but I will say a few things. Again, it's important and when you're talking about teach about ADA compliance, I'm assuming you mean teach the students, but first and foremost, you want to make sure that your staff is informed. So know your institution's policy, know where institutional and local resources are, and provide that information to your students. It should be listed, mentioned, and readily accessible, that information. Also, find out specifically what your students can access and make sure that they're provided resources that they have access to. If you need to get examples, UNM, CNM, NMHED, and other universities and community colleges across the state have policy that can be referred to and used. I'd suggest using your local institution because they may have policies that are particularly relevant to that community. The community that you are, close proximity to, or that your program is a part of. As far as administrative requirements of programs, there are 6 actually administrative requirements for programs, and these are things that they would do in their classrooms for their students. And these are: each program must have a designated ADA coordinator. Each program must provide public notice. And what that means is that they must provide information to the public, program participants, program beneficiaries, applicants, and employees about the ADA and how it applies. So you would have a public notice up in maybe a multitude of formats, particularly accessible formats like Braille, that say, to the extent of, this adult education program does not discriminate on the basis of disability in its service programs and activities. And there's a bit more to it. And I can provide samples of that. They're also required to have an established grievance policy, and there should be access to that should be provided to the students in the information and resources that they're given. They must conduct a self-evaluation, so looking at how well they're meeting these requirements, how well they're serving their students, and they must develop a transition plan regarding accessibility. So any areas for improvement need to be addressed. Now, a lot of these things can be provided by, again, the host institution. So, for example, a college like CNM, there's most likely an ADA coordinator that a program can refer to. However, if it's an independent entity, then the program itself needs to have one of their staff members, part of their role needs to be as ADA coordinator. So there is definitely responsibility on the part of adult education and literacy program directors, staff, instructors to provide certain information and resources to their students.
One of the things I would like to add is the only time neurodivergence would be considered a disability is if it impedes their learning, because we see them in the classroom. Okay. So basically what can happen, because it's a spectrum, a lot of people get through high school just fine because they have supports from home. Someone else organizes for them. What I'm seeing a lot is in times of transition, things kind of unravel a little bit for folks. So what you might be seeing is if someone is a young adult and is just moved out of the house and decided to go for their GED, that's a lot for someone to take on at once. So one of the things we do in coaching is encourage one thing at a time. Like if I saw a student like that before they left the house, I would encourage, leave the house first, get used to that, then go to school. Then too much is too much for people with neurodivergence, even if they were previously having not a problem at all because they were getting help. So those are the things we don't often see. But if you kind of read between the lines, transitions are very, very difficult. And that could be a reason why you might be seeing that, even if they haven't been diagnosed.
Can I ask really quickly, just for a little bit of clarification, because you touched on this, Dené, about having an ADA coordinator with the programs. And so you did mention already that a lot of institutions already have that in place for programs that are community-based organizations or nonprofits. What would you recommend as their best course of action if they do not have these resources in place and need support to do so?
So I would recommend that they look at how this is being executed by larger institutions locally. So they look for examples of how this is done. So for example, if it's a nonprofit community-based organization, they could look to another a nonprofit community-based organization for, communicate basically with their peers or cohorts in the field about how they do this, how they put this forward. And they can, of course, always reach out to me, and we can work through it together. I can assist and support them in putting this together in a way that they can feel confident, meeting expectations, I guess is the best way I could put it, meets requirements, and that, that best serves their students.
Thank you. And thank you both. That was, very thorough and very helpful. So I think at this point, we're going to go to our last question. It's kind of a wrap-up question. How can we support students to make their needs known in the classroom, in the workplace, and in other places?
So I think that what I would say off the cuff is sort of mirroring or reiterating what Julie said. I think that if you create the more safe of a space, the more safe of a classroom space that you create for students, the more empowered that they're going to feel to share who they are and to say what their needs are. If they have an opportunity in your classroom to do that, that's essentially practice for doing that in other spaces that may not feel as welcoming necessarily. And so providing a safe space where students have the agency, where they feel that they have the agency to make requests. I think that also giving students the resources, means, and maybe even examples and support to be able to make their needs known. And, so giving, providing those resources, in the classroom, but also asking them what their needs are, saying, if you have a concern, please come to me, having your contact information available, making yourself clearly available at certain times opens up room for them to do that as well.
One of the things I start with as well is students need to learn self-advocacy skills. A lot of people don't have them. In my class, I kind of start out small and fun, just to see where they're at. And every single class I say, okay, I need to let you know something. I'm from New York and we speak fast over there. So in my ESL classes, if you need me to slow down, I need you to speak up and let me know. And they do. And that's the start of it. And then we start working on more. That's just another way you can impose executive skills in there. One of the things about work, we have a lot of programs for self-advocacy as well at the state level. Within the workplace, one of the things I found, and this is an example from my son's journey, it was told to me when he was really young that it was going to take him longer to do everything, and it did. It took him 8 years to get his 4-year degree. He switched majors a couple times, and when he switched it to an interest area, it all fell into place. He ended up doing geographic information systems, and he got his associates in computer science. So he is now working in a company that actually acknowledges neurodivergence. And the reason I say that is because instead of working 9 to 5 or 7 to 3, they say you have to work 8 hours. It doesn't matter when you come in, as long as you're, here within the times we're open, then that's when you work. It takes all the anxiety away from transitioning from home to work. And the other thing they do for transition is they offer a DoorDash pass so they can have food delivered. That's free for everybody. So there are companies out there that are actually understanding the needs of neurodivergent people. I hope there are more someday, but since he's been there, he's gotten promoted to another position. And when that was happening, he wasn't going to apply for it. We still do coaching. We always will. Mom, I don't know, my executive functioning skills aren't that great yet. And I said, well, you've come this far. What better way to make them better than by practicing? So I suggest self-advocacy definitely. And when you start acquiring these skills, feeling more confident, then keep going. Reach out to people who can help you in that area. We're developing a list of resources at Catholic Charities, definitely, to try to help people be aligned more with what your strengths are in the job force. So that's going to just keep getting better and better because we care. We truly care about this, and we're going to make this better because we know we need to for our population of people who are using our services.
And I want to follow up. I really like that you use the term self-advocacy. I was thinking about it after I finished with my response. I think that incorporating self-advocacy into curriculum as much as possible really benefits students. And I know that in our adult education programs here in New Mexico, we have multiple IET or integrated education and training programs. And one of the core components of that is workforce preparation, which is kind of like professional development, but it's teaching people the skill sets necessary to promote themselves in a sense and to communicate who they are in a workplace. So the more that we can support students in advocating for, we can build into the curriculum or build up the skill sets as far as how to advocate for yourself in a professional environment, which an academic environment to some degree is, the more we empower them to be able to speak to their needs when they are entering into, more formal workplace settings in the future.
Absolutely. That was really profound in a lot of ways. Just self-advocacy is so important, and it's not just for adult education students, it's for everybody. Learning to do that, learning to advocate for yourself is really essential. And so, yes, Dené, I agree 100%. Building it into the curriculum is a wonderful way to work that in for the student as efficiently as possible. I think I would say that. So that's it for the questions. But I believe Dené had some ending statements really quick.
So my position is currently primarily focused on integrated education and training, or IET development, but I'm also in the process of developing 2 New Mexico Higher Education Department Adult Education Division, or NMHED AED documents. One is the NMHED AED policy for serving students with disabilities and learning differences, and 2, the NMHED AED guidebook for inclusive classrooms. The policy document will be a short document, maybe 10 to 15 pages, covering legal responsibilities, and it's going to lay out clearly in detail what specifically we're requiring programs to do and what we'll be monitoring for regarding program disability inclusivity. And then the guidebook will be longer. I'm thinking about 50 pages, introducing best practices and supports for adult education classrooms and literacy services, including topics such as learning differences and neurodivergence. It's tailored specifically toward New Mexico adult education and literacy learning environments. And so that will be more like a book, more like a packet or support document. It will also unpack getting into more detail about things like processes that programs might want to learn more about. These documents both are a guide and resource for programs to refer to with questions and for more detailed and comprehensive information. We're thinking of the guidebook we're developing as an ambitiously and progressively emphasizing inclusion and encouraging AEL instructors and staff to go the extra mile for inclusion as befits the adult education and literacy contexts. If you would like to reach out to NMHED staff regarding specific questions when it comes to disability, learning differences, and neurodivergence, along with test taking, accommodations and test taking, you would reach out specifically to the following staff. So for HSC or high school equivalency test taking accommodations, you contact Dr. Kacha Bacchus at 505-660-8824. So for general questions and for questions regarding the policy or guidebook, you would reach out to me. Again, my name is Dené Shelton. My number is 505-538-5990. And with specific questions regarding neurodivergence and learning differences, you would reach out to Matt Edelin at 505-479-0512. That's his wheelhouse. All right, and in conclusion, or something to know, is that adult learners are navigating a great deal of complexity, such as stigma, cultural perceptions of neurodivergence, disability and diagnosis, academic trauma, shaming, often in group or public settings, such as classroom spaces, lack of information or resources, lack of medical coverage, financial concerns, a history of misdiagnosis, medical industry trauma, etc. People with neurodivergence may come to the adult education classroom with negative experiences from traditional education and also potentially negative learning identities. An important role of the adult educator is to welcome and embrace people who have not been embraced in other educational contexts. There's a place for all learners, neurodivergent or not, in adult education. It is our job to get to know our students as individuals, to listen to them, to encourage them, and to make sure what we're doing is meeting their needs as learners.
All right, guys, thank you so much. This is a really complicated question that Jamie and I really kept turning on its head, trying to just figure out how to approach these and really help people. So I just really, really appreciate both of your time and your expertise to lend to the field. And yeah, it's just been a great conversation. I think this is going to be really just a fascinating episode. So thank you both for your time.
Yes, thank you so much. And thank you to all the teachers and other practitioners who sent in questions.
Great.
I mean, that really shows how much everyone does care. So, you're not wrong, Julie. Everyone really does care about this topic. So, yes, thank you both so much.
And thank you.
Connect with Adult Ed, the NMHED podcast, is a project of the Propel Professional Learning System and is funded by the New Mexico Higher Education Department's Adult Education Division. Thank you for listening.